Welcome everybody to this special History Week talk in times of need. My name's Lisa Murray and I'm the City Historian, and I'm delighted to be with you here today. I would like to acknowledge that we live, work and learn on country, and I'm coming to you today from Gadigal and Wongal country. I'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also love to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have joined us here today. We have a very special treat today. We get to hear from Margaret Betteridge. She's the Civic Curator here at the City of Sydney, and she's going to be exploring the topic in times of need, caring for community. This is very much in response to the History Week theme, which is all about history, what is it good for? And in these challenging times of 2020, it's really valuable to take stock of our history and see what lessons we can learn from the past. I'll now hand you over to Margaret. So over to you, Margaret.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And a special welcome to one of our listeners who I know has joined us from New York. Before I start, I'd like to thank Lisa and Layla very sincerely. They are two very tech-savvy colleagues who've made this morning's presentation possible. And I really appreciate your assistance and patience as I learn a new way of presenting a talk. History Week 2020 has invited us to think about why history matters to us and what the past can tell us about our current events. We've been consumed this year by a global pandemic which has swept through communities and countries across the world. We've watched as our country burns and floods. We hear daily news of tragedies and the plight of those in need. We know that these are challenges which people have faced before. But how have we responded? What have we learned? And how can we do things better? These are not new challenges. And in preparing this talk for History Week, I realised that in our organisation, which I'm very privileged to work for, I realised that crisis management was nothing new, and that in times of need, great and small, local government plays a really important role on the front line in caring for their communities. So let's explore the city's archives, history and civic collection together this morning and see what history can tell us. History is a marker of time. It provides tangible evidence of the past in documents, photographs and artefacts. It's the keeper of intangible memories, of people's hopes, dreams and emotions, of grief, pain, suffering and loss. And in objects we can appreciate the reality and imagine the impacts. I was struck by this quote that you can see on the screen from the Cessnock Eagle and South Maitland Recorder, reporting on the Spanish flu pandemic, which swept through Sydney and the rest of the country in 1900. From a business point of view, Sydney is dead. There is no life in the city. Theatres, hotels, picture shows, etc. are closed, and the usually thronged streets are not the same. The wearing of masks is general. Sounds familiar? That was written in 1919, just over 100 years ago. Sydney's seen pandemics before, and it seems from this quote that not much has really changed. In 2020, our streets were for a time empty and life on the streets was subdued. Many shops and businesses were empty and masks are back in fashion, albeit with a designer edge to many of them now. The vulnerable among our community share their misfortune with history. Within a month of the lockdown this year, the City of Sydney had risen to its greatest challenge yet. Swift was their response to addressing the immediate problems of the economic impact of job loss, business closure, the crippling effect on the arts and creative sector, and the plight of homeless people and many facing food shortages. In early March 2020, as the streets of Sydney emptied, businesses closed their doors. We were ordered to stay home, and none of us realised the scale of devastation that COVID-19 would unleash. In these difficult times, the City of Sydney, as I said, acted swiftly, implementing measures to waive fees and charges, provide rent relief, cultural resilience grants, and support for businesses. Among the financial support was a major contribution to Oz Harvest for food relief for some of our vulnerable community. And that included international students and temporary visa holders. So the reach was really quite far. But let's step back in time. In 1842, the town of Sydney was incorporated by an Act of Parliament, enabling the establishment of the Corporation of Sydney, the first local government authority in New South Wales. The Act gave the corporation the power to administer the affairs of the town, which the colonial authorities were very keen to relinquish, and vest the responsibility for law and order, managing utilities including water, sewerage, roads and lighting, and regulating trading practices and public health to the new local government authority. The map on the right is in our archive collection. It was drawn by Francis Webb Shields in 1843 to survey streets to inform their repair. The state of the streets was a constant complaint from the public. At that time, the City of Sydney was little more than an unruly village of dusty, poorly lit lanes, unhygienic dwellings, and there was no organised water or sanitation system. And cattle were routinely driven through the streets. We see this in the illustration on the right-hand side in John Ray's sketch. John Ray was a town clerk at the City of Sydney, and he produced a series of images that are so important now for us to look at the sort of streets and the architecture in the city in 1842. The reason I've included this is that council faced a huge job to repair the basic infrastructure in Sydney. We learned from the minutes of the Improvement Committee in 1843 that council passed a resolution to increase the number of men working on the city streets to not more than 300 married men, because there was great distress prevailing amongst the labouring classes for the want of employment, and the streets of Sydney required more hands to repair them. The men who were engaged by council were employed on the basis of the number of their dependents and their needy situation, as long as they were of good character. A search in Trove revealed press reports of the many and varied ways that council has helped communities at home and abroad. And we see this in this little selection of news clippings that I pasted together from Trove, that the scope and the range of relief and aid which the council, often under the sort of authority of the Lord Mayor, has actively supported and continues to support. And these were not just events that happened close to home. There were many occasions when council voted money and organised Lord Mayor's relief funding to support people right across the globe, from famines in India to earthquakes in Turkey to coal mining in Wales, and during the war, the Bomb Victims Fund in London. A search of the Sydney Alderman's website, compiled by my colleague Layla Elmoos, revealed that quite a number of men who held the position of Mayor and Lord Mayor of Sydney were Freemasons and members of lodges committed to helping communities through charitable acts and practical assistance. That doctrine shaped their commitment to serving people, and council was a platform for many initiatives that also demonstrated their commitment to serving their community. The next image is a scene of Sydney Town Hall, and in my research, I'm always keen to locate pictures of the Town Hall. This one is in the collection in the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and it's simply titled A Fireman's Funeral. It's by Arthur Streeton, and it was painted in 1894. I managed with a bit of research to find out that the fireman that it was related to was a man called Edward Brown, and he had been sent out to fight a fire that broke out in a warehouse in George Street. It was a fire that took hold very quickly. It was fueled by packing and straw in his warehouse. And unfortunately, Edward Brown was trapped when a 30-foot high wall collapsed over a laneway where he was trying to extinguish the fire. His death left a widow and a number of children in pretty dire circumstances. And Lord Mayor William Manning was very quick to rise to the occasion, establishing an appeal to raise funds to help the family out. Brown was honoured with a very public sort of commemoration, and this painting shows the crowds walking past the town hall on their way to the mortuary station for the train journey to Rookwood Cemetery. That in itself was an honour for just, you know, an ordinary member of the public. This picture, just to digress for a quick minute, is really interesting because it shows in front of the town hall the porte cochere, which was built to provide covered access when people were alighting from carriages to attend events in Sydney Town Hall. And then beyond, you can see the empty space where the Queen Victoria building was about to be built. In 1900, an outbreak of bubonic plague swept through Sydney in epidemic proportions, and that required enormous efforts by the City of Sydney to quarantine areas, to disinfect homes and businesses, and to clear away tons and tons of rubbish that was taken out of properties. Large areas of the city were demolished, and in the next image, you get a sense of the sort of measures that were taken. Bounties were placed on rats. People were paid a small amount to bring rats in for destruction. And council established its plague department just as the epidemic began to rage. Because the Inspector of Nuisances, whose job it would have been to manage and coordinate council's response, refused to be inoculated, an early anti-vaxxer, so council appointed Lewis Blackwell, along with 450 labourers to carry out house-to-house searches to exterminate rats. The scale of the menace, the black rat, can be appreciated in the statistics. In 1 week alone in March 1900, 9,000 rats were destroyed and burnt in incinerators. And in this image, we can see a rat trap in our collection, the sort issued to, like the ones issued to staff to collect the rats. And it was shown recently in an exhibition for the 175th anniversary of council, along with one of the staff record cards of a rat catcher employed by council. One of the methods used to try and combat the spread of plague was to clear out premises that had been infected. And here we see piles of rubbish in Sussex Street waiting for council collection. Rubbish was a huge problem at this time for council, as you can imagine, and these large piles of discarded household and business refuse lay on the streets waiting for collection, where they were then taken out to sea for disposal. Council's efforts were led by and inspired not only by the Citizens Vigilante Committee, of which Mayor John Graham, himself a very eminent doctor, and his successor Thomas Hughes, worked with members of the state government as well. And their efforts were coordinated by George Macready on behalf of the New South Wales government, so it was very much a collaborative effort. In appreciation of Macready's efforts, he was awarded this very impressive shield, and it was inscribed to him on behalf of all the grateful citizens that had been assisted during the plague. And he was identified as being the victor of the plague. But sadly, Macready would die shortly afterwards, a victim himself of the plague he fought so hard to combat. As World War I escalated, the Lord Mayor of Sydney established a war fund to raise money to support those left at home without the support of an income earner. Women found solace in knitting and contributing to the war effort, famously producing tens of thousands of woolen socks for men serving in the trenches in Europe as a salve and a comfort to the dreaded and painful trench foot, an affliction caused by standing for long periods in wet and muddy water. Council's role in this was to collect up and act as a depot for the donation of socks, which they then, with the help of volunteers, packaged up and sent overseas to men serving on behalf of the country. For the 75th anniversary of the Red Cross, Council was presented with a lovely pair of knitted socks, knitted by one of its members, Lorna Lilly, and this was a commemoration of 75 years of the work of the Red Cross. This organisation had famously distributed the pattern for the socks that Australian knitters used during the World War I appeal. For the centenary of World War I, Council chose to honour the Red Cross socks, a little reflection back to what it had been doing in World War I, and encouraged knitters to join knitting circles in our libraries and knit socks, not in grey, but in bright colours this time. The lucky recipients were men and women supported by the Wayside Chapel in King's Cross, whose joy in receiving them is apparent in the image on the right-hand side. Mayoresses and Lady Mayoresses played a very important role supporting the Lord Mayor in the many charities and relief work that were sponsored by the Lord Mayor and Council. They're quite often referred to in the press as the first citizens of Sydney, and newspapers regularly reported their events in great detail, particularly noting the colour, cloth and cut of lady guests' attires, and invitations to such events were keenly sought. The setting for these events were the Lady Mayoress's rooms, seen here on the left in 1937 and in the right, on the right today, with the same complement of furniture that was there when the rooms were set up. These rooms had been created in 1890, especially for the use of the Mayoress, and enhanced in 1905 with these very splendid Art Nouveau sort of cedar doors, almost creating a Parisian-style salon. These rooms became charity central and were the setting for many concerts, bridge parties, receptions, and so forth, where the Lady Mayoress would hold court and guests would be expected to open their wallets and checkbooks. In our archives are some scrapbooks made by Mrs. William Stones, recording her very social life. For over 30 years, Mrs. Stones was a member of the Lady Mayoress's Appeal Committee, which was initially established as a clothing appeal, and the members worked tirelessly through the Depression collecting clothes and fabrics, which they sewed into clothes for men, women and children. Their distribution was done to ensure that only the most needy were given the clothes, and the funds then raised by street appeals were donated to charitable organisations to distribute. And the Lady Mayoress's work continued until 1992 across various charities until it was disbanded. It was a casualty of the fact that so many women had now joined the workforce and just didn't have the time to actively participate in that sort of fundraising. The Lady Mayoress's debutante balls were another highly successful charitable event led by the Lady Mayoress of the day. Sydney Town Hall would be transformed for the evening, and as you can see, very elegant evening was had by all. It was a tradition that originated in England to introduce marriageable aged ladies to eligible young men. But at the City of Sydney, it was used as an opportunity for fundraising. We recently had a call out for people to share their memories of Sydney Town Hall, and we were delighted with the response. And interestingly, an overwhelming number of women recounted their memories of their debut, just underlining what a special evening it was for people, but also it was important in raising funds for the Lady Mayoress's charitable concerns. The glamour of such events is captured in our Civic collection with this evening gown worn by Mrs. O'Day at one of these functions. World War II saw the revival of a war effort managed by the Sydney Lord Mayor, and as well as comfort parcels for servicemen overseas, Council helped sponsor the Hyde Park Buffet, which supplied meals and a place for servicemen to meet and gather socially. Such was the appreciation for this initiative that Council was presented with a very handsome cabinet, which records the grateful thanks from the individual service organisations, military, navy and air force for this particular initiative. The Civic collection also records different aspects of this particular time in need. The recent donation of a cotton bag is a really fantastic reminder of the collection that men and women volunteered for to help raise money for different war support services. And this bag was one used to collect items for jumble sales that the fund held from time to time as a fundraising effort. The image on the right-hand side is a painting of Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip, which was donated to Council as a thank you to the people of Sydney from the people of Britain for the huge effort that was organised for food relief as part of the war effort. Australia sent an enormous amount of food and particularly wheat across to England to help feed the population there. I found a really lovely photo in Trove, which I'll show you in a minute, but Sydney was rocked in 1927 by the collision of a harbour ferry, the Grey Cliff, which was rammed by a much larger vessel, the Tahiti, in Sydney Harbour, and it resulted in the drowning of 40 men, women and children. The people of Sydney were absolutely shocked and devastated by this event. And in the next slide, this is a very, very poignant image of the port authorities with the belongings of the people who had drowned, which they had been able to rescue. Again, the Lord Mayor rose to the occasion and established a fund especially to raise funds for the families who'd been affected by the tragedy. And right through the history of Council from 1842, this public show of compassion by leaders of the community and practical assistance has marked Council's history over the last 178 years. We weren't always seduced by glamour as an organisation. This is the photo of the coronation of King George VI. And as Sydney prepared to celebrate in style, Council turned its attention not just to high society, but to its community, reeling from unemployment and the hardship of the Depression. Council resolved to provide a luncheon to celebrate the occasion for 1,000 unemployed men and women. And this luncheon was held in in the Lower Town Hall at Sydney Town Hall. And the aldermen were all issued with tickets to distribute to constituents in the different wards in the City of Sydney. The attendees were treated to a luncheon, and you can see them here sitting at tables enjoying Council's hospitality. The men attending the function were given gifts, albeit cigarettes, sign of the times. Handkerchiefs were distributed for the women, and they were given chocolates to take home for their children. the highlight of the luncheon was the attendance as a guest by the Governor of New South Wales, Lord Wakehurst. And he was congratulated in the press for sitting down at the tables with the men, accepting beer from the jugs and bottles on the table. And he was also given the same gifts as the attendees, which I thought was very sweet. But the highlight of the day was Lord Wakehurst's attendance, as I said, and the fact that he mingled very freely with the men and partook of the beer sitting at the tables with them, which was a lovely gesture. Irrespective of this current pandemic, Council continues to support its vulnerable communities. High on the list of much anticipated events for many of our friends in our local community is the Homeless Connect Day in Sydney Town Hall, where businesses share their skills and services with people who are really desperately in need. And we have on our website information where the City of Sydney distributes its assistance, and also how we as citizens can help people in need, which is a very important part of living and being part of a community. So I'm going to conclude this little talk by noting the role of Sydney Town Hall as the setting for so many events associated with times of need throughout the year. In so many ways and on so many days and nights, this remarkable building works hard for its community as a place where the community comes together to help others in times of need. Thank you.